Hey, church family, I wanted to take this opportunity to present you with another word of encouragement as we continue to watch the end times unfolding right before our very eyes. Now, when it comes to the topics of diversity, equality, and inclusivity, I'm always intrigued by the fact that those who preach tolerance the loudest, they're typically the same people who are quick to condemn anyone and everyone who doesn't share the same exact worldview that they have. With that being the case, we should take a moment to ask, what does diversity actually look like? Is diversity just about the color of our skin? Or does diversity also include a variety of opinions and ideas? What does inclusivity mean? Should those who promote the value of inclusiveness, should they make it their aim to exclude those who have a different point of view? What about tolerance? If tolerance is truly a top priority in our life, then wouldn't the slightest display of intolerance only go to expose the hypocrisy of those who claim to be so tolerant? With these questions in mind, it's important to understand that those who claim to stand for diversity and equity and inclusivity, those who claim to be super tolerant, they must be prepared to tolerate every political point of view that is out there. They must be ready to accept every idea in the goal of becoming diverse and equitable and inclusive. However, rather than making room at the table for every opinion and every idea and every worldview, there are those who claim to value the virtues of diversity, equity, and inclusivity, and yet they're so quick to purge every person. They're so quick to cancel anyone who fails to embrace their own progressive point of view. It's diversity for everyone who agrees with us. I'll give you a few examples. It was last October when CNN's anchor Don Lemon, he set the tone for this style of diversity, equity, and inclusivity when he declared this. He says, we have to stop demonizing people. Okay, good start. We have to stop demonizing people. And then he says, and realize that the biggest terror threat in this country is white men. It's white men. Now, in order to qualify his point, he goes on, to help Chris Cuomo, who was sitting there listening to him. He wanted to make sure that Chris Cuomo wasn't offended. So Don Lemon insists that he's referring to the white men, the ones who have been radicalized to the right. And when Lemon refers to the white people who have been radicalized to the right, I think he's just referring to Republicans who apparently don't get to benefit from the political unity of those who are preaching diversity, equity, and inclusivity. Further evidence of this was revealed last January when a lawyer who was employed by PBS, that's the Public Broadcasting Service, he was caught on camera and he was letting his audience understand that if Biden wins, they ought to send Homeland Security to take the children of every Republican voter and put them into re-education camps, because of diversity, equity, and inclusivity. Or how about last October when former MSNBC host, his name is Keith Olbermann, he declared this. He says, Trump and his enablers and his supporters and his collaborators must be prosecuted and convicted and removed from our society while we try to rebuild it and to rebuild the world. Wow. And so if Olbermann values the virtue of diversity, equity, and inclusivity, then why is it that he refuses to apply these virtues to those who voted for Trump? Is there some sort of higher virtue that cancels out the plans to achieve diversity? Is there a higher virtue than equity or inclusivity? If so, then what is this higher virtue which enables someone like Olbermann to feel virtuous as he exposes his lack of toleration for Trump supporters? Maybe MSNBC's host, Nicole Wallace, can help us to answer this question. It was just a few days ago when Wallace suggested that the military should use drone strikes on Americans if they're identified as domestic terrorists who are inciting violence. And just to be clear, Nicole Wallace went out of her way to explicitly identify the sort of domestic extremism that she was referring to, and she informed her audience that she's referring to those who agree with all of the ideologies pushed by Trump. Okay, so if you incite violence, like Antifa or BLM activists who just fought with the DC police last Saturday night. If you're engaged in this sort of violence, well, that ought to be tolerated because, this sort of violence is based in equity and diversity. But if you incite violence because you agree with the policies of former President Trump, well, you're a domestic terrorist and you should be taken out with a drone strike. It's incredible. The hypocrisy is just incredible. Without debate, there are extremists on both sides of the political aisle. There's no doubt about this. There are extremists on both sides of the political aisle. There are racist Republicans and there are racist Democrats. There are Republicans who incite violence and there are Democrats who incite violence. With that being the case, can't we just say that let's just punish criminals? Let's just punish criminals on both sides of the aisle, regardless of the reason, because this would be equitable. This would be equal, right? If someone incites violence, it doesn't matter if they're doing it in the name of racism or in the name of inclusivity. Violence is violence and it should be punished. At the same time, listen, if you truly believe in the virtues of equity and diversity and inclusivity, if these are virtues that you celebrate and promote, then, well, you ought to believe then in the equal punishment of those who incite violence. At the same time, if you believe in diversity, then you ought to tolerate those who have a different point of view than you. And if you truly promote inclusivity, then you should, make sure that you aren't excluding those who stand on the other side of the political aisle, because this would not be inclusive. If you truly value tolerance, then you ought to show it by tolerating those who disagree with you. And I say this to every single person who really values these virtues. Listen, it's easy to tolerate people who agree with us. When you find yourself with someone who basically agrees with everything you say, well, it's easy to tolerate them. It's easy to love them. But then this wouldn't be the true test of tolerance. The true test of tolerance is, will you tolerate someone who disagrees with you? And with that, I encourage every Christian, let's love those who disagree with us. I like the way that Jesus put it in Matthew chapter 5. There he declares, "You have heard that it was said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemies, bless those who curse you, do good to those who hate you, and pray for those who spitefully use you and persecute you, that you may be sons of your Father in heaven. For he makes his sun rise on the evil and on the good, and sends rain on the just and on the unjust. For if you love those who love you," he says, "what reward have you? Do not even the tax collectors do the same? And if you greet your brethren only, what do you do more than others? Do not even the tax collectors do this?" Christian, listen, we've been called to love everyone, and even those who make themselves our enemies. We've been called to love everyone with the love of the Lord Jesus Christ, regardless of whether we think they deserve that love or not. Rather than hating on those who have a different political point of view than us, let's walk in the love of the Lord so that we can help others to see the love of Jesus in the way that we treat them. And with that, I encourage you once again, let's continue to fight the good fight of faith, all for the glory of God.